Hello, everyone. I have not done a live on YouTube in a long time, so I'm not even sure what I'm doing. So hopefully I did this right. So my name is Jack West. I run Steven Avery Project, MAM Gossip, Justice with Jax, and on Steven Avery Project is where I do live videos most often because that is what I know, and I'm old and I don't like change. And so what I've been doing is still doing live videos there, but then I have to upload them to this channel because Facebook only keeps videos up for 30 days, and I don't wanna lose my content. So then Christopher, my moderator, who's the smarts of this operation, suggested that instead of going live on Facebook, I should go live on YouTube. And then we can just share the link from here to Facebook since Facebook doesn't keep it anyway. So here I am, and hopefully there's people here and people can comment and all of that. I'm going to have to learn how to do all of this stuff. So what today is the fourth installment of me reading from my book that I self-published on Amazon, which is called Wrongfully Abused: Making an Advocate for Steven Avery. And this book is about my history with the case and my thoughts of the case. And I self published this on Amazon in 2022. So, and I've never done reading from it, and I've read from other books, but why haven't I done my own? So here I am going to read today for an hour or so. Um, I had been doing the readings on Saturday mornings early because I was trying to do it at a time that is better for around the world. Um, but I'm just too busy on Saturdays for the foreseeable future. So, um, again, Christopher with the big brain told me I needed to stop worrying about what would be good for people to watch it live because most people watch things recorded anyway. So just do it at a time that's convenient for me. So I literally just got home from work um 10 minutes ago. And so it's let the dogs out real quick and come up here and not be prepared because of doing this on YouTube that I haven't done in a long time. So I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I am not the tech expert. So, a thing we've discussed in previous episodes is that when I self publish this book, for whatever reason, there's no page numbers. So if you are reading along from home, the chapter we're starting on is so many rabbit holes. I mean, that's a constant thing in talking about any case you deal with is you fall down so many different rabbit holes and get distracted. Um, hold on a second. Let me see. Okay. Whatever. This is a thing on the bottom saying, "Welcome to live chat. Remember to guard your privacy and abide by our community guidelines." Whatever. Um, here we go. I have written so many articles on this case, whether it be just giving myself a timeline of something as I search the evidence, or what my thoughts were after a hearing or a show or book covering the case. I have already included some and will share them all in this book as I know it would be nice to have it all in one spot and feel it would be beneficial for you, the reader, whether you are new to the case or have been around as long as I have. The next section is titled Evidence Presented in Avery Dassey Trials. I will further explain afterward anything I think needs explaining on. Many of the items are things that I thought were important to remember. So this is another like timeline. And I know it's a weird it's light, so you can't really see it on there with how bright this light is. Stephen and Lori Avery divorced in 1988. Chuck Avery was charged and acquitted of second-degree sexual assault in 1988. In 1998, he was found guilty of disorderly conduct following a family altercation. Less than a year later, he was charged with raping and attempting to strangle his wife with a telephone cord. The couple agreed to defer judgment pending further violence by Chuck, and the charge was finally dismissed in 2003. The couple divorced. Earl Avery was arrested after his wife claimed he beat and choked her during a drunken argument. He pleaded no contest to battery and was sentenced to 10 days in jail and 18 months probation. 3 years later, he was charged with sexual assault of a child. He pleaded no contest to fourth-degree assault and battery and spent 45 days in jail and 3 years on probation. Barb Yonda was charged with possession of marijuana in 2005 and pled no contest. Stephen Avery was arrested for violating a disorderly conduct ordinance after an altercation with his girlfriend Jody Stokowski in October of 2004. The court ordered him to stay away from her for 72 hours and to pay a fine of $243. Alleged murder of Teresa Halbach was on October 31, 2005. Brendan Dassey was booked on March 1, 2006. His charges were first-degree intentional homicide, rape, first-degree sexual assault, pregnancy, which I don't understand that, bodily harm, and mutilating a corpse. On April 13, 2007, Steven Avery was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, rape, first-degree sexual assault, pregnancy, bodily harm, and mutilating a corpse. So let me scan through that. All exactly the same charges for both of them. On December 24th, 2015, why does it say that? Informational threats, harassment, stalk. December 25th, I don't know, 2015. Informational suspicious person. January 16, 2016. Informational suspicious person. January 19, 2016. Informational threats, harassment. I don't even know what this means. I don't even remember. Brendan's trial began on April 16, 2007. And ended on April 25, 2007. There were only 3 charges: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and first-degree sexual assault. Ken Kratz claims premeditated beginning at 8:12 a.m. on October 31, 2005, when Stephen Avery called AutoTrader. Defense. Brendan and Blaine Dassey got off the bus at 3:45 p.m. on October 31, 2005. And I've talked about in prior lives that I really want to do like a whiteboard behind me and, just start, or I need to figure out on all this of, like sharing my screen, and I could just bring stuff, get everything in a spreadsheet of all these dates and the timeline. Because it's really kind of crazy, all this stuff, that the timeline itself shows that these guys are innocent. Barb Yonda came home and made dinner for them at 5 p.m. Blaine left at 5:20 to 5:30 p.m. with his friend Jason to go trick-or-treating. Barb left around 5:30 p.m. to go with Scott Taddock to Green Bay to visit his mom in the hospital. Blaine's boss called at 5:45 p.m. Brendan used to work for him too. Stephen Avery called Brendan shortly after that and asked him to come watch a bonfire. 15 minutes later, Stephen called again and asked what is taking so long. Brendan was changing his pants and putting on a sweatshirt because it was chilly. Brendan got there around 7-ish. They drove around in Dolores Avery's golf cart picking up debris. When they were done, Stephen asked if Brendan wants to help clean the mess in the garage. After about a half hour, they go out to the fire, and Stephen got a call on his cell from Barb. She wanted to know if Brendan was there. Barb reminds Stephen to tell Brendan he needs to be home before 10 and to make sure he has a sweatshirt on. They watch the fire, and then at 9:30 to 9:45, Brendan goes home. Scott Toddock says he saw a fire at 7:30 to 7:45 p.m. on October 31, 2005. Teresa Halbach's boss, Tom Pierce, called her mother, Karen Halbach, around 1 p.m. on November 3rd, 2005, because she didn't show up for work on Tuesday or Wednesday. He was worried because her voicemail was full, and that was unusual for Teresa because that was her business phone also. Karen called her sons, Mike and Tim, to ask if they heard from Teresa. She also called Auto Trader to ask when the last time they heard from Teresa and didn't get an answer. Karen then called the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Teresa's brother, Mike Halbach, got into her cell phone records and knew her last call was Monday, October 31. He used her cell phone records to retrace Teresa's steps. Missing posters were put out on November 3rd and 4th, 2005. Teresa's ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hilges, planned to get a group together at Teresa and Scott Blodorn's house on November 5, 2005, to do an organized search in Manitowoc where Teresa was last seen. Teresa Halbach was reported missing at 5 p.m. on November 3, 2005. Teresa's car, and there's a typo there that says theirs car, but it's Teresa Halbach's car, a RAV4, was found on November 5, 2005 at 10:30 a.m. by Pan Sturm, Karen Halbach's husband's first cousin. It was about 350 feet from a car crusher in the back corner of Avery Salvage Yard. The box Teresa Halbach had for her Palm Pilot said it was a Palm Zyre 31 brand. Teresa's sister, Katie Halbach, testified she gave Teresa the blue lanyard the key to her RAV4 was on. Investigators become actively involved in the search at 2 p.m. on November 5, 2005. Detective Jacobs asked immediately if Steven Avery is in custody. On November 6, 2005, Brendan Dassey denied any knowledge of Teresa Halbach's death. Firearms found at Avery family members' homes and Stephen's garage was searched on November 6, 2005. Volunteers helped search the 40 acres of 40,000 cars at Avery Auto Salvage on November 7, 2005. There was a .22 caliber Marlin Glenfield semi-automatic rifle hanging above Stephen's bed. On November 7, 2005, law enforcement found male blood in 6 locations in the RAV4 and female blood in the back. Law enforcement took the burn barrels into custody on November 7, 2005. On November 8, 2005, Deputy Andy Colborn removed all the contents of Steven Avery's nightstand. No evidence was discovered. They searched Steven Avery's trailer on November 8, and Lieutenant Lenk finds a key on Stephen's bedroom floor by a pair of slippers. The RAV4 plates were found by volunteer fireman William Brandis on November 8, 2005, kind of on the path on the way to the trailers. The burn pit behind Steven Avery's garage was searched on November 8. Alleged human bone fragments were found, but law enforcement claimed they couldn't examine or recover the area because of Stephen's German Shepherd bear, who was chained up nearby. On November 9, 2005, they declared the bones as human and female. Steven Avery was arrested for a weapons charge on November 9, 2005. They found a cut on his hand and took a swab of his saliva. More alleged bones were found in the burn pit on November 10. Also on November 10, they claimed to find DNA on the key that was found in Stephen's bedroom. The blood that was found in the cargo area of Teresa Halbach's RAV4 was a match to DNA from a soda can Teresa had in the front seat of her car on November 11. Yay, story time! On November 29, Scott Toddick tells law enforcement he arrived home at 3:15 p.m. and then went hunting the day Teresa Halbach went missing. Steven Avery's preliminary trial began on December 6, 2005. Judge Patrick Willis decided there was enough evidence to hold Steven over for trial. On December 20, 2005, Steven accepted a settlement from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department for $400,000 for his wrongful conviction of the attempted rape of Penny Bernstein. Steven Avery pled innocent to Teresa Halbach's alleged murder on January 16, 2006. The FBI said the cremains found in Steven Avery's burn pit belonged to Teresa Halbach on January 19, 2006. Investigator Wiegert re-interviewed Steven Avery's family on February 20, 2006, and Steven's niece Kayla said her cousin Brendan Dassey has been acting up lately. On February 27, investigators Mark Wiegert and Tom Fassbender went to Brendan Dassey's school and took him out of class. Brendan was re-interviewed again after 10 p.m. in a resort hotel in Michigan. Wiegert and Fassbender took Brendan to his trailer to get his jeans that had bleach stains on them. They also took his mom, Barb's, handcuffs and leg irons. They're pink fuzzy things, by the way. Brendan Dassey was interviewed again on March 1, 2006, and law enforcement got a search warrant for Steven Avery's garage. Brendan was arrested. On March 1, 2006, law enforcement found 2 bullets in Steven Avery's garage, and lab technician Sherry Colhane claimed Teresa Halbach's DNA was on one of them. Special Assistant District Attorney Ken Kratz, also known as Sweaty Sweat, held a press conference on March 2, 2006. Brendan Dassey was charged on March 3, 2006, and bail was set at $250,000. Len Kaczynski was appointed to represent him. Law enforcement found 11 separate .22 caliber shell casings on March 6, 2006 in Steven Avery's garage. Steven Avery's girlfriend, Jody Stokowski, was released from jail on March 6, 2006. Hi, Bryce. On March 7, investigator Wiegert re-interviewed Kayla Avery and got a statement of Brendan Dassey's alleged involvement in Teresa Halbach's murder. Kratz added kidnapping, false imprisonment, and sexual assault with a dangerous weapon to Steven Avery's charges due to Brendan Dassey's alleged statement on March 8, 2006. Steven Avery's pretrial begun on March 17, 2006, and Judge Willis upped his bond from $500,000 to $750,000. On April 3, 2006, law enforcement took a Q-tip and swabbed the hood latch of Teresa Halbach's RAV4, and Sherry Colhane allegedly got a full profile that it was Steven Avery sweat. And there's no such thing as sweat DNA. Len Kaczynski emailed his investigator, Michael O'Kelly, on April 27, 2006. What is today's date? 29th. And told him his plans were to use Brendan Dassey to help convict Steven Avery. On May 9, 2006, Michael O'Kelly emailed Len Kaczynski an outline on how he will coerce a confession from Brendan Dassey. Judge Fox said Brendan Dassey's statements were voluntary and admissible on May 12. Michael O'Kelly manipulates Brendan. Sometime in May 2006, Steven's girlfriend Jody was caught drinking and spent another 5 nights in jail. She is issued a no-contact order from Steven Avery. Judge Willis forbids Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department from any involvement in Steven's trial, and it was moved to Calumet County. Judge Willis also ruled that the defense cannot suggest to the jury any suspects by name except for Brendan Dassey. Judge Fox denied Brendan a new attorney. In June 2005, no, that would be 2006, Sheriff Andy Colborn filed his report about his interaction with Steven Avery from November 3rd, 2005, 8 months earlier. Brendan wrote a confession on June 30th to Judge Fox recanting his confession. Judge Fox finally dismissed his attorney, Len Kaczynski. Jody Stokowski ended her relationship with Steven Avery on August 31, 2006. Judge Willis dismissed 2 of the 3 charges against Steven Avery on January 29, 2007, kidnapping and sexual assault, because the state wouldn't indicate if Brendan Dassey would testify in Steven's case. Judge Willis denied the state's motion on January 30, 2007 to exclude the blood vial. The state asked a judge to allow the FBI to develop a chemical test to prove the blood was not planted, and the judge allows it. A test like this had not been done in over 10 years. Steven Avery's trial began in Chilton, Wisconsin on February 12, 2007. Richard Mahler was dismissed from Steven Avery's jury on March 16, 2007. Steven Avery was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide and possession of a firearm on March 18, 2007. He was found not guilty on mutilation of a corpse. Brendan Dassey's trial began on April 16. Brendan was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and second-degree sexual assault on April 25. Steven Avery was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of early release on June 1, 2007. Brendan Dassey was sentenced to life with the possibility of early release in 2048 on August 2nd. On January 15, 2010, Stephen Drizin, co-founder of the Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth, was now defending Brendan Dassey and claimed Len Kaczynski did not have Brendan's best interests in mind, so he should be granted a new trial. Stephen Drizin showed that Michael O'Kelly was only interested in convicting Steven Avery in spite of what that would do to Brendan Dassey on January 21, 2010. Drizin said since Len Kaczynski was dismissed for allowing Brendan to be interrogated without an attorney present, then the phone calls that resulted from that should be inadmissible. In September 2010, the press found out about Ken Kratz's sexts. That's hard for somebody with a lisp to say, sexts, to clients. He resigned in October 2010. On December 12, 2010, Judge Fox denied Brendan Dassey's motion for a new trial. The Wisconsin Court of Appeals upheld Judge Willis's denying Steven Avery of a new trial on August 24, 2011. In December 2011, the Wisconsin Supreme Court refused to review Steven Avery's case. Steven Avery files to represent himself on June 5, 2012. The Wisconsin Court of Appeals upholds Judge Fox's decision denying Brendan Dassey a new trial on January 30, 2013. On August 1, 2013, the Wisconsin Supreme Court refused to review Brendan Dassey's case. December 18, 2015, Netflix released Making a Murderer. This is what Ken Kratz claimed happened at trial due to Brendan's alleged confession. These are his words. Sweaty sweats words. Brendan Dassey hears screaming in the trailer. He knocks on the door. Steven answers and is sweaty. Steven tells Brendan he raped the woman he has in his bedroom. Kratz then claims Brendan said this on October 31, 2005. Brendan sees Teresa Halbach tied up. She was shackled with handcuffs and leg irons. Steven asks Brendan if he wants to have sex with her. Brendan says yes. After the rape, Steven praises Brendan. They discuss if they should kill her and how. Brendan tells Steven he will help him. Steven stabs Teresa and then gives a knife to Brendan, who then cuts Teresa Halbach's throat. They take her unclothed to the garage and place her on the floor. She isn't dead yet. Brendan waits with her while Steven gets the .22 caliber Marlin Glenfield semi-automatic rifle and shoots her about 10 times. at least twice in the head, including the left side of her head. She is now dead, and they load her into the cargo area of Teresa Halbach's RAV4 and decide how to dispose of her body. Steven says they should burn the body. Brendan helped do that. They carried Teresa to the bonfire in the back of the garage and threw Teresa on the fire. I don't know if I've seen the full press conference, Bryce. I don't remember. It's been so long. They also throw a car seat on the fire. Ken Kratz reminds the jury here to put in their notes that this was a two-person job and not a one-man job. Ken Kratz claims Brendan Dassey told them he and Steven Avery drove Teresa Halbach's car to the pit area and concealed it with branches and a car hood, and they removed the plates. Steven, for some reason, went under the hood of the RAV4. They then went back to the garage and cleaned it with bleach, gas, and paint thinner. Brendan gets a big bleach stain on his jeans. Steven Avery took the RAV4 key and put it in his bedroom and then threw Teresa Halbach's clothes in the fire. Law enforcement recovered 5 of 6 rivets of Teresa's Daisy Fuentes jeans in the fire pit. Katz claims a zipper and other clothing were found as well. Teresa Halbach's Motorola V3 Razr cell phone and PowerShot A310 digital camera were allegedly burned in the burn barrel earlier in the day. Ken Kratz claims the proof Teresa Halbach was in the trailer is the Auto Trader magazine and bill of sale being in his living room. So much I want to say. Ken Kratz tells jury again it had to be a two-person job to pick up the hood and put it against the RAV4. Sherry Culhane got 180 items of evidence, which they claimed was the largest submission of evidence ever at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Ken Kratz claimed the blood was flung on the back cargo door. Teresa Halbach's, see, to me, flung is somebody flinging it. Teresa Halbach's blood was allegedly on the rear tailgate door handle and on the soda can. Steven Avery's blood allegedly positively matched on the rear passenger door near the ignition and the CD case on the front passenger seat. One of the bones still had some tissue on it, muscle tissue. Sherry Culhane, big hair, developed a DNA profile and allegedly positively matched the leg bone to the exemplar of Teresa Halbach. Ken Kratz claims there was no doubt it was with 100% certainty Teresa Halbach. Ken Kratz says Teresa Halbach was killed on October 31, 2005. Jody Stokowski called Steven Avery at 5:36 p.m. and 8:57 p.m. on October 31, 2005. Steven Avery used a different name, B. Yonda, when he called Auto Trader to make the appointment. Teresa Halbach called Barb Yonda at 11:43 a.m., saying she will be out sometime after 2 p.m. Teresa Halbach was at the Schmitz residence at around 1:30 p.m. Then sometime between 2 and 2:30 p.m. at the Zippers. Dawn Pliska from Auto Trader talked to Teresa Halbach at 2:27 p.m., and Teresa said she was on her way to the Avery brothers. Ken Kratz says Avery is less than 10 minutes from the Zippers. It's more like 15 because you can watch videos here of when my husband and I went and we time it. So he says Teresa Halbach got to Avery Salvage around 2:27 or 2:40 p.m. Ken Kratz says Teresa Halbach's family and friends become concerned on November 3rd and retraced her steps. On the 4th, they did aerial searches, looked at financial transactions, and checked out her cell phone records to see what cell tower she pinged off of. There is just so much in that list that shows there is tons of reasonable doubt in this case. Next is what I wrote up when Brendan was being pressured into saying something happened to Teresa Halbach's head. It's another deep rabbit hole, as people think since there is more to that interview than what was shown on Making a Murderer, it means that Brendan said these things of his own free will. He absolutely was not. Let's dive in. Wiegert. What else did you guys do? Come on. Fassbender. What he made you do, Brendan? We know he made you do something else. Wiegert. What was it? Pause. What was it? Fassbender. We have the evidence, Brendan. We just need you to be honest with us. Brendan. That he cut off her hair. Wiegert. He cut off her hair? In the house? Brendan. Mm-hmm. Wiegert. Why did he do that? Was she alive? Brendan. No. Wiegert. What did he do with her hair? Brendan. He set it down on the counter. Wiegert. The counter where? Brendan. Like a dresser. Fassbender. What did he use to cut the hair off with? Brendan. The knife. Fassbender. Was she alive? Brendan shakes his head no. Fassbender. Did he say why he did that? Brendan. No. Wiegert. Okay, what else? Fassbender. What else was done to her head? Brendan. That he punched her? Wiegert. What else? Pause. What else? Fassbender. He made you do something to her, didn't he? So he would feel better about not being the only person, right? Brendan nods yes. Yeah. Wiegert. Mm-hmm. Fassbender. What did he make you do to her? Wiegert. What did he make you do, Brendan? It's okay. What did he make you do? Brendan. Cut her. Wiegert. Cut her where? Brendan. On her throat. Wiegert. Cut her throat to when did that happen? Brendan. Before he picked her off the bed? Wiegert. So she was alive yet, right? Brendan nods yes. Wiegert. So she's alive and you cut her throat? Brendan. Mm-hmm. Let me pause here. Because I wrote this book so long ago and I don't remember all that I've put in this book. And I have done so many live videos in the 10 years I have been doing things on this case. But I just have to point out here Brendan isn't stabbing anybody ever. So it is really crazy for them to prod Brendan like this to get him to say the things that they want him to say, and for anybody to think that that boy could stab anybody or rape anybody. This is a sweet boy with low IQ. I'm going to say he has to be on the spectrum. His whole family are hunters. Brendan's not a hunter. There is no way, even if Steven was being this big bully and you do this, uh, Brendan would have run out of there crying, or if he couldn't get out of there, he would have just fallen to the ground and sobbed. And he's a big boy. Um, you're not making Brendan physically do something he doesn't want to do. He's a big, strong boy, uh, bigger than Steven. Um, so, and there's that time when Brendan didn't want to go to a family birthday party. Um, and so he like ran off and people were chasing him, trying to get him and force him into a car to go to this birthday party. He's a big boy. Um, there, I don't care what Brendan says, what they got him to say. It is not possible for this boy to hurt somebody. Just not. But Bryce is absolutely correct. One of his brothers, an avid hunter, is very capable. Wiegert. Was that before or after Steve stabbed her? Brendan. After. Wiegert. It was after Steve stabbed her? Brendan nods yes. Mm-hmm. Wiegert, was she, how do you know she was alive? Pause. Tell me, when you cut her throat, how do you know she was alive? Brendan, she was breathing a little bit. Wiegert, she was breathing a little bit. Did Steve tell you to do that? Brendan, yeah. Fassbender and Wiegert are speaking at the same time. Cannot understand. Fassbender, how'd he tell you to do that? What'd he say? Brendan, to go across her throat and pull it back. Fassbender, did he say why he wanted you to do that? Brendan, no, and shakes head no. Wiegert, which knife did you use? Brendan, the same one he stabbed her with. Fassbender, how many times did you stab her again? Brendan, once. Fassbender, are you sure about that? Brendan nods yes. Wiegert, so Steve stabs her first, and then you cut her neck? Brendan nods yes. What else happens to her in her head? Fassbender, it's extremely, extremely important you tell us this for us to believe you. Wiegert, come on, Brendan. What else? Pause. We know. We just need you to tell us. Brendan, that's all I can remember. Wiegert, all right, I'm just going to come out and ask you, who shot her in the head? Brendan, he did. Fassbender, then why didn't you tell us that? Brendan, because I couldn't think of it. Fassbender, now you remember it? Brendan nods yes. Tell us about that then. Brendan, that he shot her with his 22. Wiegert, you were there though? Brendan, yeah. Wiegert, where did this happen? Brendan, outside. Wiegert, outside? Before? Tell me when it happened. Brendan, when we brung her outside to throw her in the fire. There is so much bull smurf right there that it is hard to know where to start picking it apart. I do not know how anyone could ever think Brendan came up with any of that himself and that any of it was truthful. The kid was clearly just grasping to understand what they were trying to get him to say. For Brendan to say, because I couldn't think of it, that should tell you all you need to know right there about this so called confession. None of the things Brendan said have been proven by any real evidence. There isn't any DNA in Stephen's trailer of Teresa Halbach or Brendan Dassey. No hair, no bodily fluids, no fingerprints, no sweat DNA. Where was she shot? Was it the bedroom, the garage, outside? The magic bullet was found in the garage. Yet Brendan is saying here that she was shot outside by the fire. If she is dead already, then why does she need to be shot? How is this woman's throat slashed and shot multiple times and still doesn't die? None of this makes any sense whatsoever. So the only evidence they have is a clearly coerced confession from a young boy with a low IQ. You would think this wouldn't stand up in court, but we all know that's exactly what did happen. Something I've mentioned already, but here is another list I wrote to keep track of suspicious things is the crime scene log sheet for Avery Auto Salvage. Read through the list and I will discuss afterwards. And this is another list and we will read. 11/5/05. RAV4 found at 10:30 a.m. Log started on 11/5/05 at 2:25 p.m. And I actually have these log sheets um, in the drawer down there somewhere. Um, at 3:26, Remacher, Kratz, and Wiegert went in. At 3:32, Griesbach was in. 4:07, Kratz out. 4:17, Kratz in again. 5:12, Coburn in. 5:25, Josh Redant and Travis Grohl in. At 5:35, Josh and Travis out. 6:28, Colborn in. So something to keep in mind as I read this, This is also why it's so sketchy, is you'll have ins and outs, but no corresponding in or out. So Colborn's in at 5:12, he's not signed back out, but then here he's at 6:28 signing in again. 7:16, Kratz in. 10:41, Lenk, Remacher, and Colborn out. 11:18, Peterson in. 11:27, Wiegert out. 11:50, Wendy Baldwin in. Now on 11:06:05, 5:08, Josh Verdant in. 5:28, Josh out. 6:58, Dietering in. 6:59, Josh in. 7:10, Josh out. 7:20, Wendy out. And so it's, why is the neighbor on the property so much? Then at 9:03, Ryan Hilgas and Scott Blodorn in. 9:22, Todd Herman out. That we never had him sign in. 9:53, Ryan and Scott out. 10:05, Todd Herman in. Then at 5:51, Herman is in again. At 7:24, Colborn, Link, and Remacher in. 7:40, Poggle in. 7:45, Wendy out. 8:05, Dietering out. 10:20, Wendy in. 11:35, Dietering in. 12:06, Herman in. 12:11, Kratz in. 12:24, Dietering out. 12:40, T. Herman out. And at 12:58, T. Herman back in. 1:05, Dennis Remacher in. 1:13, Dietering out. 1:15, Poggle out. 1:25, T. Herman out. 2:08, Dietering in. 2:48, Poggle in. 3:32, Dietering out. 4:20, Remacher and Colborn out. 4:25, Dietering in. 6:28, Lenk out, who wasn't even signed in. 6:52, Wendy out. 7:18, Poggle out. 11:07:05. 6:32, Wiegert in. 7:15, Lenk in. 7:16, Colburn in. 7:17, Poggle and Wendy in. 7:38, T. Herman in. 9:03, Ryan and Scott in. Why is the victim's family in and out of a crime scene? 10:03, Herman in. 10:18, Brian, Laura, and Nancy Hallbach in. I don't even know who these Hallbachs are, but they're now on the property too. 10:27, Poggle out. 10:53, Herman out. 11:01, Herman in. 11:03, Poggle in. 11:06, Colborn, Lenk out. 11:47, Fossbender out. 11:51, Josh in. 12:29, Josh out. 1:26, Poggle in. 2:02, Herman out. 2:19, Wiegert and Poggle out. Oh my gosh. There's a ton more pages of this. I'm not going to go through, I'm not going to continue to read all of these. If you want to read all of them, read my book. I'm just going to go into the bolded ones because those are the ones that are more important. At 3:43, Brian, Laura, and Dennis Hallbach are out. So Dennis Hallbach never even signed in. And Brian and Laura were then there for 5 hours. And now Gary and Debbie Hallbach signed out. And they didn't even sign in. But then at 4:28, Ryan and Scott are back in. Then at 8:05, there's a Joe Hallbach at the crime scene. 6:41, Ryan and Scott in again. That were never signed out. 7:07, Ryan and Scott are out. On November 8, 2005, Steven Avery's trailer is searched again, and this time Lenk finds a key to the RAV4. The RAV4 plates are found by volunteer fireman William Brandis. Human bone fragments were found in the burn area, but claim they couldn't examine or recover the area because of a German Shepherd chained up nearby. So then on November 9th, here's all the signing in and out. On November 9, law enforcement declared the bones as human and female. Steven Avery is arrested on a weapons charge for the .22 caliber Marlin Glenfield semi-automatic rifle that belonged to Steven's landlord that hung over the bed. They find the cut on his hand and take a swab of his saliva. And then here's the signing in and out on November 10th. Law enforcement recovers more bones. They also find DNA on the key. Then the signing in and out on November 11th. On November 11th, the blood found in the cargo area of the RAV4 allegedly matched a soda can Teresa Halbach had in the front of her car. The scene was released to the Avery family on November 12, 2005. And then I wrote, look at all the times a Halbach or Ryan Hilgas and Scott Blodorn are at the crime scene. This is after the RAV4 has been found. Why are they allowed there? The Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department isn't supposed to be there either, but look at all of them in and out constantly. How is this not suspicious at all? The next chapter is trials, hearings, and filings. This will be our last chapter for tonight. I don't know how long this chapter is, so I don't even know if we'll finish it. Early on, I would write an article after any hearing or filing. I've gotten lazy since then, and now I just do Facebook Live events on both Steven Avery Project and MAM Gossip. I will share the ones I wrote with all of you. They cover what was presented as well as my thoughts on them. The first is titled Recap of Zellner's Post-Conviction Relief and is dated June 13, 2017. We have been waiting a long time for Kathleen Zellner to show us her cards, but not as long as Steven Avery, Brendan Dassey, and their families. I read through the 220 pages that were released last night, but I am going to go through them again and type my thoughts of the things that stand out to me. I am not a lawyer and do not claim to know it all. I'm just someone who has followed the case and want to see these men freed. So follow me down the rabbit hole, won't you? Page 1 says Steven asks to vacate the judgment against him and for a new trial. I know many people just want Steven to just walk out immediately. I know Kathleen said at one point she would not go for a new trial, but exoneration. But haven't we all learned by now that our legal system sucks and is incredibly slow? I do not know our legal process well enough or at all to question Kathleen's decisions. Page 3 says that Steven has been locked up for 10,909 days for crimes he didn't commit. He has been alive 20,058 days. Of the 4,238 days since Teresa Halbach was murdered, only 9 days were devoted to identifying the alleged murderer. Page 4 begins with her idiot savant description of Ken Kratz's many theories. Here are my thoughts on this. Is Steven the most brilliant man in the world? No. We know he has a low IQ, plus most of his life has been stolen from him, and he is institutionalized. What was Steven's motive for killing Teresa? He was free from prison, had some fame from that. Depositions had just started in his $36 million suit against Manitowoc County. He was going to get a couple $100,000 from the state outside of what he was suing for. He had a girlfriend. Even if you think Steven is an asshole or abusive to women, why would he kill some random girl at his own house during the day in a working salvage yard? Why would he call Auto Trader to schedule an appointment when he had her private cell number that he could have just *67 if he was trying to cover his tracks. Don't tell me he used a fake name when the Yandas had an account with AutoTrader, and that's what car was being listed. Stephen allegedly kills Teresa in his tiny bedroom by slashing her throat and stabbing her in the stomach after raping her, yet there isn't any DNA there at all. I really don't get putting the body on a creeper to roll her body to the fire pit behind the garage. Have you been to Stephen's trailer? I have. It wouldn't be easy to roll a creeper out there. Teresa was a little girl. He could have thrown her over his shoulder and carried her out there. Would be much easier. Then the story changes to say that Stephen shot Teresa twice when she is on the floor of the garage, yet there isn't any bullet holes in the garage. But a magic bullet with Teresa's DNA is miraculously found after multiple searches in the dusty garage. Teresa's body is then put in the back of her own vehicle, and Stephen was able to clean up most of the DNA except for some suspicious looking swabbed blood in the front and his sweat DNA on the hood latch. Kratz claims that Stephen burned her electronics. Sure, because Stephen wouldn't keep that stuff if it was him, right? Then he claims Stephen burned her in a barrel right by his trailer at 7 p.m. on a weeknight in a working business. Oh, but wait. Now there's a story of Stephen driving the RAV4 and Brendan drives with him. Now both of these guys are experts at covering up fingerprints, DNA, etc., as there isn't a single trace of Brendan ever being in that car. Of course, guys who have grown up in a salvage yard wouldn't just crush the car or sink it in the pond in the southeast corner of the property or abandon it in the huge quarry that runs on two sides of their property. They park it going in the opposite direction of all the other cars and then throw some branches, etc., on it to make it stick out even more. Kratz claims Stephen was wearing gloves, but is still able to leave 6 drops of blood inside the car, but not where you would expect blood to be if someone has a cut finger and driving a car. Kratz says that Stephen kept the key so he could crush the car later, yet he wouldn't need a key to do that as they would use a front loader to pick it up. Next, Stephen burns an entire body in just 3 to 4 hours without anyone noticing. He then just left the bones where anyone could find it, including his dog, who would have eaten the bones and be detected in his stool. 60% of the bones disappeared, as well as all but 2 teeth. Then Stephen picked up some large bones to put in Barb's burn barrel and the gravel pit. Makes perfect sense, right? Page 7 starts to go into evidence. The hood latch swab really came from a grain swab they conducted on Stephen and didn't log. The magic key was actually her sub key. Messages were deleted off of Teresa's answering machine so people wouldn't know it was full and worry about her being missing. Her last appointment was actually at the Zippers and not at Avery Salvage Yard. There was a message on the Zippers machine where Teresa told them she was lost and the state destroyed it. The state concealed her mileage. Teresa led a risque life by being romantically involved with a married man and doing nude photography. Her ex was verbally and physically abusive. Ryan Hilgas had scratches on his hands, which are consistent with fingernail scratches. He also gave a fake name to police and lied about his relationship to Teresa. He controlled crime scene evidence and the search party. He was regularly on the Avery property and helped to find the car. He moved into Teresa's house immediately after her disappearance and had control of all of her personal effects. On page 8, Kathleen talks about the ineffective counsel. Now, I still completely support Strang and Buting. They were up against huge odds here back then. They didn't have Making a Murderer. They didn't have Zellner money. They didn't have all these internet sleuths who have really found some good leads. They did the best they can. I don't believe that Kathleen has a real issue with them, too. This is just standard procedure in freeing an innocent man. It's so easy to lock them up, but so hard to get them out. It's just our awful system. Kathleen argues that Strang and Buting didn't do all they could for Stephen, and she's right. But it's not their fault, and rather it is the fault of our corrupt system. Page 9 begins her list of experts. Christopher Palahniuk, PhD, will testify that the bullet never went through bone. He says it actually went through wood. He also concluded that the swab they say was from the hood latch was never on the hood latch. Finally, he says the key found was not the one Teresa used every day. Lucian Haag says the bullet would have had bone particles embedded on it if it had gone through a skull. John DeHaan, PhD, says Teresa's bones were planted in the burn pit after being burned in a burn barrel. He said her body was not burned in Stephen's burn pit. Stephen Symes, PhD, says the suspected pelvic bone should have been examined microscopically to determine if they were ever even human. Not ever, even human. Stuart James says that the blood stains in the car were selectively planted and the stain by the ignition was placed with an applicator. He said the blood did not come from the vial of Stephen's blood from 1986, but was instead dripped by Stephen in his bathroom sink and was then used in the car. He also said the blood stain in the back is not from Teresa's body being thrown in the back after she was shot. Carl Reich, PhD, says the hood latch DNA probably came from the relabeled groin swab. He also said that the DNA on the key probably came from Stephen's toothbrush. Greg McCrary says they rushed to declare Stephen the suspect and ignored evidence that showed otherwise. James and Steve Kirby have interviewed over 35 witnesses and have uncovered an abusive relationship between Teresa and Ryan. James found that Ryan lied to law enforcement about Teresa's broken parking light. They also ran experiments that refute that the electronics were burned in Stephen's barrel. While interviewing Teresa's roommate, Scott Blodorn, Scott inadvertently mentioned that Ryan was a suspect. Larry Blum, MD, will testify that the scratches on Ryan's hands is consistent with fingernail scratches that occurred in that time frame. Bennett Gershman, JD, will testify on the ongoing unethical violations committed by Kratz before, during, and after the trial. Lawrence Farwell, PhD, is the brain fingerprinting guy. This is one thing I am iffy on in this whole thing. I'm not going to comment on this at all as I just don't get it. And actually, Stephen's explained it to me more since then. But page 15 starts on the state's case at trial. Page 16 has one of Kratz's various timelines. This one stating that the police only zeroed in on Stephen because he was the last appointment, so assumed the last person to see her alive. Page 18 talks about Sturm of God. I walked that yard from the office to where the car was found. I videoed and timed it. There is absolutely no way possible Pam found that car that quickly without being told where to look, period, end of story. Page 19 says that Kratz claimed that the car couldn't be seen in the flyover on November 4, 2005 because of it being covered with branches and a hood. Then says Stephen disconnected the battery so a search party couldn't activate it. But then where's her fob that would have those buttons to activate a panic alarm or unlock the doors? Kratz then claimed the car couldn't be driven back there from the quarry due to a high berm. That berm didn't exist then. Colborn called dispatch from his cell on November 3, but claims he was just verifying information and that he wasn't looking at the RAV4. They claim he used the cell because Stephen had a police scanner. On page 20, Kratz says no one had access to Stephen's blood, but Stephen was actively bleeding from his finger when he reopened a cut. The state's expert claimed that the blood by the ignition matched if someone turned the key. Let's just skip all the stuff Kratz alleged in the case, as we know that. This is long enough without me going over all that as well. On page 28, it starts in on Strang and Buting's defense. I'm not going to cover that either. We know the case, and if you want a refresher, then read up on it. I just want to cover what Kathleen says actually happened. Evidence begins on page 43. It first starts on the ineffective assistance of counsel. I already talked about my thoughts on that. This is standard procedure in getting a new trial. I do not think Strang and Buting did a horrible job. They did the best they could with what they had. Kathleen is using evidence and testing she has done to use against them, saying that they should have done these things, and by not doing it, they hurt his case, which is true, but again, they didn't have the ability to do those things. Page 50 says that Colborne showed up at the salvage yard on November 3rd while Stephen was having dinner with his mom. Colborne asked them about Teresa. Colborne then changed the time Stephen had told him Teresa had left from 2:30 to 3 p.m. But Stephen has always been consistent in saying she left at 2:30. Stephen drove back to his trailer and went to unhitch a trailer and cut his finger back open. That's how he got his blood on his car and in his trailer. He did not lock his trailer when he went out with his brother Chuck. They left around 7:30 p.m. to go to Menards, which was around 23 minutes away. They checked out at 8:06 p.m. Steve's landlord, Raleigh Johnson, said he saw the cut on Stephen's finger prior to October 31. At around 7:30 p.m., when Stephen was driving away, he saw taillights near his trailer. He believes the lights were similar to a RAV4 and not a police vehicle. They drove back, but the car was gone. So he and Chuck went to Menards and then to drop off money for Stephen's girlfriend Jody, who was in jail. He got home between 10 and 10:30 p.m. and went to bed. Stephen got up at 6 a.m. and went to take a shower. He noticed that most of the blood around his sink was gone. He consistently said that he thought the blood was planted in the RAV4 from his sink. There are interviews with the media to prove this. Lenk and Remacher arrived at 10:30 a.m. to interview him. Someone's trying to log in. So somebody's trying to log into my Facebook right now. That's not me. Awesome. Okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Stephen said he smelled cigarette smoke when he went to his bedroom, and neither he nor Jody smoked. He believes someone broke into his trailer. On November 5, when he was getting ready to go to Krivet's, he saw his front door had been pried open. He remembered he had locked the door after Link and Remacher left. When Chuck was leaving for Krivet's, he saw headlights back by the pond where the RAV4 was later discovered. He called Stephen around 7:20 p.m. By the time Stephen got to Chuck's trailer, the headlights were gone. On page 56, one of Kathleen's experts says that the blood on the RAV4 carpeting was planted because if it dripped, it would have been absorbed, but this was flakes on top of the carpet. She starts talking about the 1986 blood vial on page 59. She is blaming Strang and Buting for even using it as a defense. She says, somebody just used my email to log into Square. This is awesome. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by somebody hacking me right now as I'm speaking. She says there is no proof Lenk ever knew this vial existed in the clerk of court's office. She also claims that the defense knew that the hole in the top was created by the nurse. She said they lost credibility with the jury when they couldn't present any evidence. I'm looking to see how long this is. All right, this is long, so we're not going to read this whole chapter. So I'm going to read these 2 pages and then end it because we're over an hour. Another login. Kathleen's experts have been able to demonstrate that all of Stephen's blood in the RAV4 was planted. On page 60, it talks about the RAV key not being found after multiple searches until November 8. The defense is blamed for not using the fact that they don't need the key to use the front loader to pick the car up and put in the car crusher. Then it goes into the bookcase. It was approximately 32 by 16 by 31. Colborne manhandled this little thing till eventually the magic key popped out. The key and Stephen's slippers were not in a previous picture. Lenk is the one who picked up the slippers to allegedly look inside them. Kathleen faults Strang and Buting for not having that bookcase at trial. They could have demonstrated there is no way the key would come out and land where they claimed it did. On page 62, it goes into an experiment they did with the bookcase. They were not able to recreate what the prosecution claimed happened. Page 63 goes into the key really being the subkey. The shape of the key found clearly indicates it is the spare key and not the one that Teresa would use daily. Her car also had electronic locks, and it is seen in a photograph that she had her fob attached to her master key. No fob has ever been found, nor was the white lanyard it was on in the photo. Scott Blodorn was interviewed on November 4 in Teresa's kitchen, and Kathleen alleges you can see the blue lanyard and subkey sitting on the counter. That same key was found in Stephen's bedroom on November 8. Kathleen's experts examined the key. There were deposits in the grooves that are consistent with testimony that said the key had been placed in the ignition and driver's door after collection by Sherry Culhane. They also discovered that the key didn't have the wear and tear on it that it would if it was what Teresa regularly used. The key had Stephen's DNA on it, but not Teresa's. They didn't do any testing to prove where the DNA came from, but Culhane still testified that it was Stephen's blood from his cut finger. Kathleen's expert conducted experiments that demonstrate the DNA was planted because there was more DNA on it than Stephen deposited on a test key. Stephen held it in his hand for 12 minutes. The expert found that Stephen deposited 10 times less DNA than what was found on the magic key. Their experiment ruled out skin cells from Stephen's slippers as being the source of the DNA. But Culhane also had Stephen's toothbrush, and their testing showed that it was a comparable quantity. They never logged the toothbrush into evidence, even though it was collected. Stephen noticed it was missing when he was looking at police photographs. Page 70 says 2 groin swabs were taken from Stephen on November 9. Fassbender and Wiegert were both there. But the search warrant said they could only take blood and saliva. The nurse never put in her notes that she took those swabs. Fassbender and Wiegert then stopped the nurse, and the exam was concluded. But the nurse never would have done that if she hadn't been told to do it. Fassbender claimed the swabs were thrown out, but the nurse never noted that. Yet Wiegert told the nurse that he would throw it out while Fassbender took Stephen to be fingerprinted. Stephen heard Wiegert tell the nurse to give him the swabs and saw him pretend to throw them away, but didn't. And that is where we are going to end for today. We are more than halfway done now reading the book, little over halfway. I do not know when I will go live next. We'll make a post and let you know. And you can always follow Steven Avery Project on Facebook. That's where you will get the quickest, most up-to-date information. I am still waiting to get the filing that Kathleen is going to do for Stephen. And so whenever we get that, we'll do a live as soon as possible. And so if you have any evidence in this case, please go to KathleenTZellner.com, where she has a email and a phone number that you can get directly to her office. If you do not hear back from Kathleen, you can reach out to me at official Steven Avery Project at gmail.com or justicewithjax@gmail.com, whichever is easier for you to remember. On the Steven Avery Project Facebook page in the pinned post, that's where you can get information on how you can either snail mail Stephen. And yes, that address says it's going to Maryland, but Stephen is in prison in Wisconsin. Everything goes to Maryland to then get scanned and sent electronically to Stephen. Stephen also has access to text messaging, so you can up an account for that, but it costs money to do that. We have instructions for that in a pinned post. You can watch old videos here on the Justice with Jax YouTube for all the past lives we've done, the field trips we've done to Manitowoc. And if you want to get my book, Wrongfully Abused, Making an Advocate for Steven Avery, it is self-published by me, Jax West, on Amazon. And now I am out. And then, as always, investigation continues.